Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can. In the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the
it.
writing is sort of everything, right? Like you can fix plot holes, but if the writing is
so some readers love that, and some readers are like, "But I wanted more of this." So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello, and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. Today, I'm joined by a best-selling psychological thriller author who has sold over 4 million copies of his books across the world. His latest novel, Keep Her Secret, came out in May this year, and I'm very excited to welcome Mark Edwards to the podcast. Hi, Mark.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
Thanks so much for being here. Let's start off with, for anyone who's listening and is unfamiliar with your work and the sort of stories that you tell, why don't you give us a little elevator pitch of your latest novel, Keep Her Secret?
Keep Her Secret. Okay, so it's a psychological thriller, or you could call it a domestic noir. It's set in the UK, and it's about a couple who have recently got back together, having had a relationship when they were at college 20 years ago. And very soon into their relationship, they go on a trip to Iceland together, and they're climbing up this mountain, or they're hiking up this mountain. And they get to the top, and she's trying to take the perfect photo and goes too close to the edge and slips and falls over the edge of this cliff. And her backpack hooks on a jagged piece of rock and saves her. But while she's dangling from the cliff, waiting to be rescued and thinking she's going to die, she blurts out that she has a secret. She then reveals that secret to her new boyfriend, my main character, and he has to decide what he's going to do. Is he going to help her protect the secret, or is he going to expose her? And then after he's made his decision, somebody turns up who's overheard the whole thing, with the intention of blackmailing them, and they have to take drastic action to keep her secret, as it says in the title. So, and then it gets very dark, and there's lots of twists and turns, and characters making terrible mistakes and bad decisions, and getting themselves deeper and deeper into this mess that they have to try to get themselves out of.
Everything you would want from a psychological thriller. You've written 16 solo books. That's very much kind of, you stay within these. I'd not heard domestic noir before, but I really like that, and that's kind of very much your style and your kind of genre, and they're all along these lines.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I kind of have 2 or 3 different styles of book, but within that area. So some of them are more domestic. So there's books like The Magpies, which is about neighbours from hell, Here to Stay, which is about terrible in-laws. And then you've got ones that are a little bit more horror. Yeah. So there's a book called Follow Your Home, which is about a couple who see something terrifying in the woods in Romania. And there's one called The Retreat, which is set also in some woods, but in Wales this time. And then there's some that are a little bit more action thriller, kind of. So No Place to Run and The House Guest, which is both set in America, have more people kind of running around with guns and cults and casts of thousands. So, but they're all psychological thrillers, and they all have a domestic element to them, and they usually have a relationship at their heart as well. So it's not romance, it's not, or romantic suspense. That's another genre, but there's always a relationship at the heart of these books.
And Magpies was the first book you put. Was that back in 2013? Yeah,
so that was the first solo book. So I'd already had 4 novels published that I'd co-written with Louise Voss by that point, and then we went on to write 2 more. It sounds quite weird saying my first solo book. It makes me sound like George Michael or someone,
Yeah.
or Harry Styles or something left the band. But I always have to say that because yeah, the first four were me as part of a duo.
I'm always curious when I hear about co-writes on books, because I know that there's lots of different ways that can play out. The one that I'm familiar with, I think I watched an interview with Neil Gaiman talking about how he wrote Good Omens with Terry Pratchett and the way that they did that. How did you and Louise, what was the process you guys had for co-writing?
Well, it developed and changed, but when we started, the first book was a kind of he said, she said book. So we would write a chapter. I would write from the male character's point of view and her from the female. And then we would write a chapter and send it to each other, and we kind of went back and forth. We did discuss the plot, so we knew what was coming next.
Yeah.
But that was quite easy. And then all the subsequent books, we had a main character who we would take it in turns to write. And then we would have various other points of view, and so I would take some of the characters and she would take the others. Or there might be particular types of scene that I was better at writing and some that she was better at writing. We did stereotypically divide them along male-female lines. So I would write more of the kind of action thrillers and she would write the more romantic.
Okay.
Sorry, I would write the action scenes and she would write the more romantic scenes, for
Yeah.
example. But yeah, it was chaotic, actually. Because we're not really plotters, we're both pantsers. We would kind of have a very rough idea of what was going to happen, and we might have planned it out like 2 or 3 chapters ahead, but we would never know how it was going to end, and we would just be trying to figure it all out as we went along. Which is, that's hard enough doing it on your own.
Yeah.
But when there's 2 of you, sometimes it got really messy, but we always got there in the end. Amazingly.
You and Louise did 6 books in the end, right?
Yeah.
And if my counting is correct, you by yourself have done 16 books.
That's if you include the novellas. Yeah, I think it's 13 novels and 3 novellas.
Okay.
To be honest, I lose count myself. I'm actually having to look at my bookshelf and count them because it's hard to keep up.
Yeah. I think above a certain number, your brain just kind of is lots.
Keep a Secret is definitely the 13th though.
13th novel, yeah. And
then there's some novellas and some short stories and things.
So having written so many stories, sort of, and like you said, there is variation, but within the sort of psychological thriller genre, is there like a sort of growing challenge with each one to make sure that you're not retreading ground that you covered in previous ones?
Absolutely, yeah. That's the hardest thing about being a career author, is not repeating yourself.
Yeah.
Because there are only so many ways that you can have somebody being, stalked or things, or if somebody's gone missing, things that might have happened to them, or even like the phrasing as well, like the people's reactions to things happening. Mm-hmm. There are only so many ways that you can describe somebody's blood going cold when they realise what's going on. And I'm always thinking of really good ideas for whatever I'm working on at the moment. I'll come up with a solution and then I'll be like, hang on, I did that 6 books ago, or I've done that twice before. And then you have to try and think of something else. So, for example, in the book that I've just finished, which will be solo book 14, there was a big kind of climactic scene which was going to take place in a church crypt. And then I realised, hang on, I did that in the retreat. It's almost exactly the same. So I completely removed that whole kind of subplot from the book because it was, my regular readers would have started getting deja vu. But there are certain motifs and themes. I think there are themes that all writers return to again and again, even if they don't mean to, because these are the things that we are in our subconscious obsessed with. And often I don't even realize that I'm writing about this subject or this theme until either when I finish the book or even years later. I'll think, oh God, that was actually about that thing that happened to me like years ago. It doesn't even really register that I'm doing it. but you'll find yourself returning to those again and again. And then there are also things like, for example, I mean, I would say my main character is usually of a type. He's usually a kind of very nice, ordinary, mild-mannered guy who just wants a quiet life and wants a girlfriend or a wife and a cat or whatever, and wants to live in a nice house and not be bothered by, like most people, really.
Yeah.
And then something terrible comes along, or someone terrible comes along and threatens all of that. And my wife always says to me that my main character is very similar to me.
Mm-hmm.
So although I don't write series, I think there is a kind of a central sort of Mark Edwards standing character in most of these books. And there are certain things that you're going to get in my books that my readers expect. Like, so for example, I mean, it sounds stupid, but the fact that the main character always has a pet cat, and the cat usually comes into some kind of peril, but always survives. That's that's a guarantee. No, well, that is my guarantee, because if I threatened to kill any of my cats, people would stop reading my book.
That's where you draw the line.
Secure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's true that there's a cat in Here to Stay, and I had so many messages from people saying, you need to tell me that Charlie the cat is going to be okay, otherwise I have to stop reading this book. And they genuinely wanted to know. They didn't care about the spoilers, and I was like, don't worry, Charlie's fine, he's fine, he survives. I can't guarantee that anybody else survives, but the cat will always survive. The cat's fine.
Yeah.
And if you have a kind of, if the owners of the cat or a dog die during the book, you have to make sure that you describe how they're rehomed as well, and how they find a happy ending. Because otherwise people will worry about it. It's so funny.
Apparently there's quite a common thing with movies where there are people who just won't watch a movie if the dog dies.
No, that's true. And there's a website, I think, called Does the Dog Die?
Yeah.
But then I have to admit, I'm a little bit like that. I don't mind. I just don't want to see them being tortured or anything. That's kind of where I like horror. I love horror, and I watch a lot of horror movies. But if there's scenes of animals suffering in it, I really don't like it. So
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Getting back on track.
Sorry.
That's right. You mentioned that you are much more of a pantser than a planner. Is that still true of your writing today?
Well, I am attempting to change, partly because I'm on quite a tight schedule these days, trying to put out more, like a book every 9 months. And previously, I was always a very inefficient writer. I would just write multiple drafts and kind of figure it out as I went along, and throw away probably hundreds of thousands of words within. I mean, there's been points where to write a 90,000 word book, I've written 200,000 words just to get there, because I've thrown away so many. And I'm trying to be more efficient and not waste so much time going off in wrong directions and having to scrap huge sections of the book. So the last two, I have written an outline before I started. However, I do deviate from that outline quite a lot. So I've yet to get to the point where I could write an outline and then stick to it and know exactly what was going to happen. And there's always kind of dark spaces within the outline where I'm not quite sure how this is going to work out, but I know I'll figure it out when I get there.
Yeah.
So,
that makes sense.
So I think that at heart, instinctively, I am definitely a pantser, and I prefer working like that. But in order to try to become more productive, I guess, I'm trying to plot it out. But I find it hard, because I find it really hard to work out exactly what's going to happen when I'm not seeing it through the character's eyes. when I'm
In the
not actually
moment,
in their
yeah.
head and working out the story, and writing because when I'm writing the scenes, that's when the ideas come to me, and I kind of know, and when I'm writing conversations and dialogue and so on, that's when the ideas kind of really, really flow.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you then, so a book every 9 months, that's your target, that's what you're aiming for? Are you contracted to that, or is that something you've set yourself?
That's my current contract, but
Okay.
I did volunteer for that. and regretted it immediately. But
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, to be honest, I could very comfortably write a book a year without having to really break too much of a sweat, I would say, and take the school summer holidays off, and also probably fit in a novella or something in that time as well. I think that especially with because the majority of my books of my sales are digital, I think that readers tend to be much more fickle with ebooks, and I think there are certain authors, like brand authors, who you'll go and buy at the airport before you go on holiday, or you'll buy in shops where you might just think, okay, this is this year's Lisa Jewell book, or this is this year's Mark Billingham book, or whatever it is. With ebooks, I think that to keep people interested, especially when you write standalones like me, rather than a series, you've got to keep the books coming fast, because otherwise people just kind of forget about you and move on to the next shiny, bright debut. And that's the kind of harsh reality.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many coming out every day.
Hello, Saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
I know. I mean, I am very lucky that I have a really loyal, hardcore fan base that I've built up over the years. So I know that each book that there's going to be, tens of thousands of people who will just go and buy that book automatically. But if you want to reach the bigger audience, the faster you can get them out. Well, I mean, I don't know whether that's completely true. If you were putting one out every month, I'm sure people would soon get sick of the sight of your books.
Yeah.
But yeah, so every 9 months, that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay. And speaking of, how one way that authors will retain their brand audience is that they will do a series. Have you ever thought about doing a recurring character, like keeping it all in a sort of one bigger story?
Well, I mean, Louise and I both started a couple of series. We started a detective series, and we also had a series with a virologist, because our first hit was a book called Catch Your Death, which was about a deadly virus. This was back in 2012.
Yeah.
That came out. So I think post-SARS, but a long time before COVID.
Yeah.
Although I was one of those kind of armchair virologists, having written this book. But I just felt like we got diminishing returns with the series. And I know that you have to really commit to it. And you might have to write 6 or 7 before the series really takes off. But I feel like with a standalone, there's always the chance that you're going to find brand new readers with every book, because I know that if a series has been running for a while and I see books 7 or 8 or 9 come out, I think, oh God, do I have to go back to book 1 to get into that series, or can I kind of jump in here? I mean, for me, that's the issue with series, but also because I just like being able to create new characters and explore new things and have different settings. with every book. I like the fact that I think setting's really, really important. And I like the fact that each of my books, I could set this one in New York, and I could set this one in the Lake District, and then the next one can be in, I don't know, London or Hastings or Birmingham or wherever. I can move around the world, not just the country.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way of just kind of differentiating as like a baseline, because you do travel around a lot throughout your books. So we were talking about how it's hard to like make sure that every book is different. It's like the starting point is that they're almost all set, or at some point go to different places that you haven't gone in other books.
Yeah, exactly. And I do have a universe, a Mark Edwards universe. So I have recurring characters. So, for example, the serial killer from The Magpies, Lucy Newton, she makes cameos in lots of other books. Then I also wrote 2 sequels to The Magpies as well. And she's actually going to pop up in the book that I'm going to start writing, this month. So, and then I have, for example, in The Retreat, there's a horror author who has a huge bestseller called Sweetmeat. Sweetmeat in my universe then gets made into a Netflix series. This is wish fulfillment, and one of the female characters from a different book stars in that Netflix adaptation, and then somebody else is watching it in one of the other books, and someone's reading it, and so you have all these little kind of I mean, I borrowed that from Stephen King. I mean, when I grew up reading Stephen King, he always had these little callbacks and I mean, I don't even think they were called Easter eggs back in those days, but you'd get that little you'd get a little shiver of recognition when you saw a character pop up in one book, maybe just a mention, who had been a major character in a previous book. I love doing that, and I think readers really love it as well. So yeah, there is a universe.
It's always fun knowing that it's all of these things exist together, so that you're reading one and you think, oh, that other thing also happens like in this reality. That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And fun for you, I imagine, as well, tying all those things in.
It is good fun. Yeah. I don't think there are any in Keep Her Secret though. Sometimes they just don't fit. But then I've brought back a detective from one of my older books who has quite a major role in the book that's coming out in February, which is called The Darkest Water. That's the one that I've just finished. I've just finished editing it last week, in fact.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I've got a very short break before starting the next one.
Oh, okay. Well, it sounds like you need to like take every moment of those breaks, because a 9-month schedule is quite a lot.
I know.
As we move towards the twilight of this episode, I'd love to ask, as someone who has been writing and sustaining themselves in the publishing industry for a long time now, what advice would you give to aspiring authors looking to get their work picked up by either agents or publishers?
Well, the thing that I usually say to people is, and because this is based on experience from my own times as an aspiring author back when I was in my 20s, is be very clear about what kind of writer you are or that you want to be and where you fit. I think that people sometimes have this idea that they're going to be utterly unique, or that they're kind of blending together various different genres, and they might not even be genres that they particularly love. Like, I met a guy the other day who said he'd written a fantasy novel, and then I said, well, which fantasy authors would you compare yourself to? And he said, well, I don't really read fantasy. And I was like, well, that just seems crazy. That why would you want to write a fantasy novel?
Yeah.
If you're not a big fan of that genre, and you're not really aware of the market, and you don't know whether you're, I mean, I don't even really know any fantasy authors to name, but for me, I feel like I'm very, very aware of the psychological thriller market and who the big authors are and what the big books are and what themes have been written about and what's already been done. And I think that having a good knowledge of all of that really, really helps. So you can, when you inquire to an agent, you can say, I would sit on a shelf between, I don't know, Gillian Flynn. Sorry, it's Gillian Flynn, isn't it? Gillian Flynn and Gillian McAllister. I sit between those two authors.
Okay.
And then an agent will have a very clear idea of who you are.
Yeah.
So yeah, and be able to pitch your books as quickly as possible, kind of nail down your elevator pitch. And if you can describe your book in a sentence, and if not one sentence, 2 sentences, and the further you go from that one sentence, the harder it's going to get.
Yeah.
That will really help you as well. So if you can say this book is Jaws set on a plane or something, then
I mean, I'd love to see how that works.
Yeah, I know. I just think, well, I think that there was a book that Don Winslow described as like, it was The Chain by Adrian McKinty, and his blurb was Jaws for parents, i.e. it's something terrifying is going to happen to your kids.
Yeah.
And that was the pitch, and that's great.
That's
Although
clever.
he does use that Jaws for X line for lots of different books, I've noticed.
Yeah. I was watching a TV show actually recently called Based on a True Story, and I was watching it and I thought, wow, I wonder if the pitch for this was they went to the studio and said, oh, this is Only Murders in the Building meets You. And I was like, that's literally what this show is. They just took 2 really popular things and put them together.
Yeah, and that does work, because I'm always trying to think of ideas like that. If a high concept idea where it's X, and the X might come from the structure, and then the Y is the theme of the story or the type of story it is.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be like a direct like mashing of 2 things, right? It can be like, oh, this thing from this, but this thing from that.
Yeah, it could be the historical period times the, I don't know. I mean, I could make something up now. It could be something set in Victorian times, but with a, oh my God, I don't know, like a kidnapping or something.
Yeah.
And then you would say it's insert name of something very famous set in the Victorian period meets something very famous with a kidnapping in it. So.
The one I've seen recently is the very popular one is it's something meets Bridgerton.
Yes.
Because Bridgerton was obviously very in the zeitgeist, and so lots of people were pitching, oh, it's this in Bridgerton.
Yeah.
Which, like Love Island in Bridgerton. Like, there you go.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Sold. It's gone to auction.
Yeah, exactly. Of millionaires. That was easy. So I think having the big ideas, being able to describe them briefly, and then also being able to know who you are and be able to describe yourself, because like it or not, if you're interested in being a commercially successful writer and you want to sell books and you want book deals and you want to see your books on the shelves, and you're not just kind of writing it for fun or for friends and family to see, then you've got to have some commercial sense, and you've got to be prepared to kind of see yourself and your books as commodities that you're going to try and sell.
Yeah, you have to. It's always good, and lots of the agents that I've had on the podcast have said, just as like a piece of advice that some people often don't look into, is just do look into the market and be aware of where you think you might fit in the market. Very
exactly,
simple.
Yeah. And also be aware of which agent, who different agents represent, and what kind of books they like, and so that when you are pitching, you know who to send your stuff to.
Yeah.
I think the other important thing, sorry, this is my very long answer to your short question, is just get out there into the community and make yourself known. So, for example, if you're a crime novelist, go to the crime festivals, go to Harrogate and Crime Fest, and meet people, write reviews of books, get yourself known on Instagram or as a blogger, get into that community and make connections. because it's fun and it's lovely to meet all of these people. But also when you've written your book and you're looking for somebody who might be able to give you some advice or a blurb or something, then you've got contacts.
Yeah, 100%. Getting involved with like the community of, and even if it's not like a specific genre community, just the writing community as a whole.
Yeah.
There's lots of critique groups that are a mixture of genres, a mixture of age groups in terms of what the writing is targeted at. That's great advice. Yeah, really good. And that brings us on to what is always the final question. And that is, Mark, if you were stranded on a desert island with one book, which book would you take?
Well, I'm going to say my favourite book of all time, which is The Secret History by Donna Tartt.
Oh, yeah. It's a good one.
I've already read it 6 or 7 times. But every time I've read it, I just love it. I find myself sinking straight back into it. I so enjoy spending time with those characters and in that world that she created. I think I could happily read it over and over and over again. And I just think it's the greatest novel that I've ever read by a long, long way. And I know that nothing else will ever come close to it. I just adore it. I read it at exactly the right age as well. I was a student. I must have been 21 or 22 when I read it. So I was right at that. I think sometimes people read The Secret History when they're in their 40s or 50s. They don't quite get it as much as when you read it when you're young. But and I read it and I pressed it on like every single person that I'd ever met. Like, you've got to read this book.
It's great.
And my daughters, I've got 2 teenage daughters, and they've both read it and they absolutely loved it as well, which was a great
I bet you were nervous. If they didn't like it, you'd be like, no.
Yeah, it was also one of the first books that I lent my wife when we first met, and she also loved it, and it's her favourite book as well. So,
are you taking a cut of the sales?
We were meant to be together because we both love The Secret History so much. So,
it's definitely one of those books that a lot of people talk about, but does live up to the hype.
It's just brilliant. Yeah.
That's a great choice. Obviously, you're very passionate about it, and potentially, it sounds like you're sponsored by The Secret History. But thanks so much, Mark, for coming on the podcast and telling us all about your writing and what you're kind of working on at the moment and how the whole process goes. It's been really cool chatting with you.
Oh, thank you. It's fun. It's good fun.
And for anyone listening, if you want to keep up with what Mark is doing, you can follow him on Twitter at Mr. Edwards, or on Instagram and Facebook at Mark Edwards Author. To make sure you don't miss an episode of this podcast, follow along on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. You can also support the show on Patreon. And for more bookish chat, check out my other podcast, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again to Mark, and thanks to everyone listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can. In the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.